All right, we're live.
All right. Good day, everyone. I'm Maritza Johnson. I'm the director of the Center for Digital Civil Society at the University of San Diego. And joining me on stage is Yacov Salomon. He
Hello.
is the he's the CTO and co-founder of Ketch. And we're both here to talk about a collaboration that we've been working on as part of the Ethical Tech Project. And we're very excited to share both. I feel like we have two things that we really want to share with you all today. We want to share with you one, an introduction to our group, the folks behind the Ethical Tech Project. What's our mission? Who are we? What is it that we're really craving to see in the world? And we're also going to share with you a specific initiative that we've been working on as part of this group called the Privacy Stack. So as you're listening to us talk through our presentation, coming along with us in this session, I want you to think about these two separate things, not separate, these two different things, themes that we're going to be talking about today. One is an initiative, a group, people coming together to, ask for new solutions to a specific problem. And then also this thing that we're working on called the reference architecture. I'm excited to be able to share what we're up to at this particular time because I think it's fair to say that it's relatively early days and there is an opportunity for interested people to get involved and also offer what could be very useful steers in the early days of this work. So if you're listening along and wondering when are we going to get to the very polished end result that gives you a nice clean package solution to what we're talking about, that's not going to be the session. Uh, we'll come back in, sometime with that session. So without further ado, I wanted to share, let's see, I'm getting used to the controls. All right, so our goal with the Ethical Tech Project is we are a group of people who are working toward building the infrastructure for ethical tech. Now, for our theme today, we're talking about ethical tech, responsible tech, privacy tech. And one theme that we see throughout each of those three core areas is the need for more room for technology that supports human flourishing, a space in the conversation for people to feel as though they have data dignity. And underlying all of that, I think there's a strong need for better technical infrastructure that allows for increased control over data. And I think part of the thing that is really missing from the conversation right now is not just the ability to say and have confidence that your data is being used in a particular way. And of course, we all know that there are myriad of issues related even just to knowing how your data is being used. We also need better assurances about how our data is not being used. So in data control, we want to focus on both of these things. The folks behind the Ethical Tech Project, we've been working together for roughly, say, over a year, and we came together. We were brought together by the current chair of our board, Tom Chavez. So he's a co-founder and CEO at Ketch, and really at this time, I would say that there was a big craving for, or just kind of like an acknowledgement to say, hey, the way that data is being used in consumer products is pretty messed up. If you have questions about how your data is being used, where do you go to get clear answers about that? If you want to know about a company's data practices in a meaningful way, how do you get access to that information? If you feel like your data is being misused, how do you put your hand up and say, I don't want this to happen anymore? We're bucketing all of that under this term of data dignity and basically bringing together a group of interdisciplinary people across academia, industry, and public policy to figure out how can we have better solutions in this space. And for many of you who are listening in the audience, I'm sure you're already aware of sort of the heft of this issue, the amount of work that needs to be done, and also the need for strong interdisciplinary people, sorry, not just tools, people who are ready to design new tools, build in new processes, and come together to collaborate in a good way. And I've been really happy with the Ethical Tech Project, where I think we have a great group representing the different roles and sectors that need to come together to make a change in this space. Now, you might be wondering, well, what is that we do? So what are our verbs here? How are we building infrastructure for ethical tech? And with this group, As I've said, it's a big, hefty problem that we're working on right now, and we know that there are a handful of different streams that need to come together for us to make progress here. And so one of them, just by bringing together the Ethical Tech Project, we're convening people as a community who are interested in tackling this problem in an interdisciplinary way. And like back in September 2021, when we first came together as a group, we were um, really motivated by the headlines that we were seeing. We were feeling like we were constantly seeing companies being, it's being pointed out that data is being misused, that there's a lot of space for us to do better. And at at the outset, it was how do we bring together people who are hungry for a new solution? So convening is a big part of what we do. And here's what I'll say: we have a big opportunity where we want to bring together a broader group of folks who are interested in working in this space. So if you're, wondering how to get involved, definitely reach out after this talk so we can chat about that. We have our a session following this where we can network a bit too, which would be great. Another thing that we're interested in, we're looking at defining new standards for data infrastructure. So we're not just, we know that the problem doesn't start internally. We're looking for new industry standards that companies across the data supply chain can implement so that we have better standards for data control that work together so that we can, give better assurances about where your data is and how it's being stored, whether it's deleted, how it's being used, answering many of these questions. And we also know that a big part of our work needs to focus on advocating. So we're creating space for these different, for our different stakeholders to come together and I think be really kind of open about the problems that we're facing, the need for new solutions, the amount of work that there is to be done, and really drawing attention to the the sort of lack of data dignity in kind of our everyday experiences with technology today. And also, I think get folks excited about like where is there opportunity in doing more with data if we have better, more concrete rules about how data should be used and also tools that actually enforce those rules. Now, a lot of us are working from sort of an entrepreneurial spirit where we're wanting to make progress on each of these themes as we go while also having limited time here. And so we're mixing some of these where we're combining our advocacy and calling for standards. And one of the ways that we've done this is to introduce our really getting our ideas out there with a 3 op-ed series about data dignity. So let's see. At some point, we can share our slide deck and we can share links to this op-ed series that ran in Fortune, where we really draw attention to the problem. So, how is it that we got here? I think it's really interesting to look through sort of the historical moments and the changes in technology that have led us to this place where if you stop and think about it, we really don't have data dignity. How do you, answer these questions about what's going on? Um, Wanting to acknowledge the different forces at play and the various places where change needs to happen. Our second piece was about the need for better privacy regulations in the US. So how do we create the right incentives so that big tech is, innovating in the space and also creating effective tooling. And then this third part, we talked a lot about, well, what would those actually be and what's needed? What do we have out there in the field today? And how do we start to solicit requirements so that we can do more? Now, Yacov and I, we started to get together in a working group as part of the broader ethical tech project, where we're interested in, what would it look like if we had a new privacy standard? If we were to, actually, one of the things that was, I think, a common theme in our conversations was this lack of clear direction about what infrastructure is needed so that we could do better on these big problems that we're identifying. And so we got together to say, all right, well, let's get together a working group of folks who, have interest in the problem, have expertise in building systems, and think through what would it take to change the conversation here. And a key insight that we had early in our work was that permission is fundamental. And this, it almost felt naive or even like we are introducing a solved problem when we first came to this framing. At least just to speak from my own perspective, I think about it, I'm like, okay, so permissions, like, okay, well, we have notice and consent. We have privacy settings where we're configuring and expressing preferences about how our data is being used. When I install apps on my phone, permission, I've seen a lot of permission dialogues. I've been asked for permission a lot of times. I'm like, yeah, so then, well, what's missing from our current infrastructure in terms of permission? And one of I'm going to talk through an example right now where that I think really drives home sort of the a key disconnect in today's systems that needs to be addressed. So when we start to talk about data dignity, as we're talking about ethics and we're talking about responsible data use and also privacy, really, I really do feel that permission is fundamental to it. So when we're thinking about, ethical decision making, where you're making promises to your users based on the benefits that they're expecting to receive, and also, in responsibility, when you're thinking about like where does your job start and end, permission really is fundamental to it. It's like, what is the context in which you're working, and what do you have permission to do within that role that you've negotiated with your customers? What do they expect from you? And I want to pull out this example that um, you might see as you're signing up for different accounts. Um, a lot of the times as you're signing up for accounts these days, it is common for the service to ask you for your phone number to keep your account secure. So we're familiar with two-factor, multi-factor authentication, where maybe an SMS is sent to your phone number so that they can be sure that you know you're you both have your password and you have a device that's associated with your identity. And typical in these in the dialogue that asks you to provide a phone number, you might see a note that says something like what's underlined above. So your phone number is only being used to keep your account more secure. And one thing, that we've learned from the headlines is that those pixels that you're seeing on the screen might not actually match what's implemented in the infrastructure. So the company that's collecting your phone number purely in the name of security, you've consented, given permission for your phone number to be used for security purposes. How do we be sure that the same company organization is really only using your phone number for that purpose? Um, Today, it's the case that we only come to learn about misuses of data once somebody's put in, once an external party has put in, I'd say, a good amount of sort of external white hat hacking abilities to figure out what's actually going on here if they suspect misuse. Um, and that's a fundamental problem. So this is a gap in our current infrastructure where we can't say for sure when pixels like this are presented to us that say we're collecting this data to secure your account. How do we be sure that those words are actually connected to an implementation that upholds this promise?
Mhm.
And so here's, that's just like a simple example of the sorts of conversations, the sorts of problems that we're interested in looking at. And then from those examples, we came to these requirements for data users. So what else is needed? What is needed in a system where we're saying we have enforceable permissions? And here I'll hand it off to Yacov. Could you tell us about these?
Yeah, absolutely. And um, we're going to transition now. The top of the conversation, as Maritza said, was a lot about setting up the sockets for what the ethical tech project is, and we're going to go from here into. I see some questions here and some comments coming in about, okay, how do you make it real? And so that's where Maritza and I kind of teamed up. I'm much more about technology. I spent the last 2 decades building AI, machine learning, companies, technologies, products. And so when we approached this problem earlier on in 2018, where a lot of the founders here were part of Salesforce at the time, got acquired, and we really realized very quickly that beyond the legal framework that is being introduced and humanity trying to figure out how to treat data ethically, there is a lot of questions remaining on how does all of that meets the technology we have built over many years now to process, collect, store, analyze data, right? So permissions is this first concept that Maritza introduced. And under that umbrella of permissions come these 5 pillars, as we call them. that guide us on the way to construct the standards. And it's about purpose. It's this recognition that going forward, every piece of data for every use case will need a legitimizing reason to be collected, stored, and processed. So this notion of what are you going to do with data? Control, which are and we'll talk about it in a moment, the fine-grained controls that a technical system needs to have to afford all the different configurations to make data subject in the context of privacy or other stakeholders in the context of ethical data be able to control how the data is being used. Recognition, this idea that we need to have bona fide entities that actually come to the table when you transact on data and create those quote-unquote contracts about what can and can't be done with data. Transmission is the recognition that data really today, beyond just a controller and a processor in the context of GDPR or the first party, second party, third party in the context of maybe ethic and martech, data today lives in long supply chains. If you think about any one of the real ecosystem out there where data is being collected and funneled through, there's many players. So we need to have a notion when we talk about permissions, not just within organizations, but how do we think about the ecosystem as a whole? And then rectification, things go wrong. How do we address that? So that's the high level of those 5.
I'm going to interrupt to
Perfect.
Pick up on one of the questions I'm seeing in the comments. So having back at this, sorry, I missed the comments, but I'm guessing this one came up as we were chatting through the slide of, permission is fundamental. And there's a note from Lourdes that, in conversations she's sharing with policymakers, there's a criticism about consent. Cool platform. Right, you're hearing a lot of criticism and skepticism about this model of consent, permission-focused privacy, and I think there are rightfully questions being asked about, is this enough, and what are the limits to consent, permission-focused privacy, and what else needs to come into play? And one thing I want to highlight in terms of the work that we're doing is that when we're talking about permissions, we're not necessarily assuming that this means that the end user is being inundated with even more kind of specific requests for, is this okay? Do you want to give access to this? Do you want to give access to this? Like, once we have infrastructure that has more of a awareness and ability to enforce permissions, we can then create space for better delegation.
Mm-hmm.
I think right now we don't have good models for delegation in our data supply chains, and by having enforceable controls, this makes room for that, right? Like I don't know that we're going to, in the data conversation, get away from a place where like somebody's writing policies. Like at some point we need to take our social norms and map this to policies of appropriate use that map to different domains and sectors. I think what's missing right now is we've kind of collapsed all that into one thing to say this is only about a relationship between the collecting organization and the end user. And I think we could do more if we open it up to think about collective privacy or sector-specific appropriateness. There's a lot of work to do on top of building new infrastructure that would inform this. I hope that gives more color to how we're thinking about that.
I don't see the slides. I don't know if we're sharing them back. Somebody can help us. Here we go. Perfect.
Here we go.
Next click then. So as we continue this conversation now, moving on to standards. Maritza, maybe yes, perfect. I think the first thing that we, as we set up to do that, and I'll attest here, I was skeptical initially. I know that there's plenty of other standards out there and plenty of organizations doing a good job, and I was a little bit skeptical if there is a need for yet another standard. So one thing we've done is we went and spoke to a few standard organizations. So one more click here. The main 2 that we spoke to were NIST and Triple B. We spoke to others as well. And you all probably are familiar with both of them. They each have their own pros and cons in terms of what they offer in market. NIST is a very well adopted standard. They don't do accreditations, but they have a big following and a lot of contributions from the market and from various different industries and sectors. The idea up there is really to appeal to developers, but the acceptance criteria that comes at the end of it has some technical aspects that are still remaining as an open questions. And just speaking as a technologist myself, I like when somebody introduces the problem in terms of a problem statement, what needs to be solved. When it comes in the form of a lot of acceptance criteria, it's sometimes hard to understand what exactly does it mean in terms of what the data and the system that store it need to change and how they have to morph to adapt into those acceptance. And it's true also in terms of accreditation. So Triple B, for example, is an organization that looks to accredit it. In their acceptance criteria kind of flow, they will attest that the acceptance criteria bullets that take the longest to kind of verify are the one where you need to sit down and explore the system and ask a whole bunch of questions and ask those technologies to open the curtain and kind of get behind the machine. And so in both of those conversations, we've learned that what feels like is missing still is what does it mean for a technologist today that is building a data stack? What are the components? What are the modalities? What are the additional integrations that are required to take the existing stack and turn it into something that would comply? And that's where we started diving in. I've been in various working groups in different places, and I do sense that we have a lot of policy and a lot of legal voice in the room in some of those standard formations, but we have relatively few technologies still standing up and being in those. And so one of the way that we are looking to bridge this is with this idea of putting together some form of standard/reference architecture, which we'll speak about next. So empowered and encouraged by these conversations, we started to put together a documentation. And I'll spend a moment now, maybe if we get a couple more clicks, or the next one. Yep, one more. So first of all, who is the audience? We were very clear from the start that we're really trying to appeal to the technologists with this. We feel like that is the voice that, like as I said, was missing from the room. And I think it's also, technologists. I'm a technologist as a person. I care a lot about what happens with privacy and data dignity from a civil perspective, from a humanity perspective, right? From a human perspective. But as a technologist, what I really care about is what do I need to do to make sure that the organization is best set up for success in terms of applying whatever policies exist today or tomorrow, whatever regulations come today or tomorrow, in such a way that doesn't mean that I need to become an expert in world policy and privacy, and also in terms that I don't have to keep bleeding resources into this, and I can go back and building the products and the services that delight our customers. So it's really about what do I need to do? Teach me what I need to do to my current stack so I can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on here, I also want to point out, so just add a little color here that, like, from my experience of working on a privacy team within one of the big companies, I never, if ever, rarely encountered a conversation where it was that somebody was kind of maliciously wanting to misuse data or kind of going out with an intent to kind of do what we might view as like the wrong thing or do something bad. But there is definitely a hunger for like, well, can you give me concrete advice? Like, here's the thing that I'm building. How do I understand the thing that I'm building in such a way that, there's clear guidance, or I can understand like what components are missing, what are the requirements. I think one of the things that I've heard a lot from usually from a product manager would be something along the lines of like you're giving me a high level you're giving me high level advice, or what I need is something that's very specific, or what I need is like a goal so that I can like morph my product into a thing where I can actually like, design within the constraints or design to something specific. I feel like this is where there's a lot to be done. Like what we've been thinking about a lot is like how do we bring kind of technologists and builders into the conversation who don't see themselves as a privacy engineer or don't see themselves as a privacy expert, and they're wondering, how do we do it? Um, and kind of in the background of a lot of our conversations, Yaakov, you've talked a lot about your experience of like the early days of big data and the early days of Hadoop. Would you give us some of those anecdotes about like what it kind of like looked like as you were thinking about
Yeah, I
like
mean, it is.
building the new tools and going from there?
That's right, and like this is almost a pivot, and I realized that in a lot of privacy conversation, I'm just looking at the comments. The focus is very much from the stakeholders, from either the data subjects or the companies inwards. This is really about coming from the data and the technology upwards. Early days, I remember both in big data and in machine learning and AI, there was a lot of busy work on trying to assemble the tools. We didn't even have a clear language on what do we mean. We knew a database, that's kind of the old world of quote unquote small data, but now we have new things, and we needed new scale, and we needed new tools to manage these new systems. And with time, it took a few years. The industry stood up, and now a lot of folks can just draw the stack that is the big data stack. But for a while there, it was a secret special source that is new for only a few. Definitely in the mid 2000s. So I see similar work is happening here. We saw a different, in different area. If you think about accessibility on the internet, UI, specifically user interfaces, and how initially it was a new thing, this idea that website needs to be also accessible for people with different aspect of accessibility and disability. And engineers initially had trepidations about it. They felt like the need to do so was very much introduced in terms of requirements, and it slowed down and it broke some concepts and it made things harder. But sure enough, with time, as it was presented as a problem, technologies came together, and now these days there's good libraries and good patterns that everybody follows, and now it becomes kind of a feature rather than a bug, as we say it, right? Where we are all standing up and including it technically. So I think similar things are going to happen here in privacy. We're going to learn new norms of how we build systems to have all of that kind of built from the get-go. Okay, so here's the high-level problem statement that we set to solve with the reference architecture, and is really to empower technologies to architect, design, and build, maintain this notion of a privacy by design stack. And the three key criteria that we wanted to make sure that we hit is one that, as a technologist, I'd love to have a solution that I can implement once. The world will keep changing. There'll be GDPR 2.0 and GDPR 3.0 and new regulations, and the world will keep getting fragmented and fractured in terms of privacy regulations. But the system I've put in place has all the knobs and the levers and the handles, all the configuration that is required for it to natively adapt to whatever the world goes, right? So I like, as a technologist, I like to think that I'm making an investment that will help me and help my organization comply today, but also that I don't need in 12 months to revisit it. So this idea of implement once. There's also this idea of we need organizations. It's not, that a lot of the conversation I hear out there from CIOs is this idea of a zero-sum game. Data is either a liability or data is an asset. The truth is that companies need both. We can't keep switching between, oh wait, let's enable data everywhere, send it everywhere, analytics, everybody have access to data, and then have that reaction of like, oh my God, it's too much, just close everything, secure everything, lock it down. How can we come with a solution that moves us forward in both ways, right? And I often say that, in my world at least, these things are synergetic. More security, more privacy creates better quality data for companies, that fed into intelligent system produces more value, that ultimately builds more trust with the consumers. So if done correctly with the right technology, we can actually build these into an engine that creates more of everything. And the final thing is affording these controls. Like I've been personally in boardrooms where lawyers and technologists and security folks are trying to talk to each other and understand and interpret things. It's tough, it's time consuming. It'd be great if the technical systems can also give every little stakeholder their own swim lane to kind of run freely, the controls they need to empower the system. So if you want legal, you can write the policies. If you're a security person, you can put in the security measures. And if you're a technologist, you can just integrate the systems, and then things just happen. So these are the three kind of criteria we had. And one more click then. So what is a reference architecture? And at least from our perspective, reference architecture, which differs from standards to some extent, is a way to define a common vocabulary. So when we point into components and modules, we can kind of name them the same. I don't believe that our naming is the one that maybe will prove the test of time. I think naming is always kind of evolving, but at least we're going to start with something shared. There's ideas of reusable designs, things that you can walk into a whiteboard in any tech kind of conversations, and you can sketch something quickly. And we have boxes and arrows and flows that we can all agree on. We have some industry best practices, so we point into collaboratively into what's the staging and sequencing of becoming compliant. And then we focus on concrete architectures, right? Like, so reference architecture, and this is the note here at the end, it does not try to dictate what is the right implementation. I totally believe, we all believe here, that implementations are going to vary. Some people are going to opt for buying, maybe using services that exist out there and increasingly will deliver the value, or they might decide to build, or maybe they'll go for some hybrid. There's going to be a plethora of open source projects out there that address the different aspects of the problem we're trying to solve here. And all of those implementations are fine. What we really want to do is create the reference architecture above that says, what are the things I need? And what is the design? What are the elements that need to be true about each one of those components, so that I can make a decision either to buy, or when I build, what's going to address that. All right, so let's drop one level even deeper and just share with you a little bit the components. The reference architecture we're putting together now is going to be very incremental. It's important that we start from the simple and build into the complex. So you will see in a moment, and I'll show you some diagrams of what a simple versus all the way to an ecosystem system looks like. And the idea there is really to try to address all the different permutations that exist out there of data stacks, but do it in a progressive kind of way. There's ideas of components and component design. We need to understand what are those big buckets that will give us those, all the functionalities that we need. I will say already that if you take nothing else from this conversation, I think from how technology will evolve. I remember when, before the networks, before the internet, right, that computers were just a standalone kind of machines, and we talked about mainframe, and we talked about servers and stuff, but it was in a different context. And then we introduced the network layer, and the network layer became a bona fide thing that we've thought of as an entity that sits and connects our computing powers. The permissions that Maritza mentioned, yes, they have an aspect that maps into how we think about consent and so on, and I see that's where the conversation went in the comments. But from a reference architecture perspective, from a technical perspective, these are much more tactical permissions. There are signals that go along with the data to help control how it is being accessed, how is it being used, and how is it being permitted. And the permission layer is what the reference architecture is really designing around. So in the future architectures of data, there's going to be a data layer as it exists today, where it collects from and where it flows and goes into different systems and different services to create value. But then there is the permission layer on top of it, whereas we're collecting when needed consent or other signals that are required, and then everything else. So that's where the permission layer comes in. and we'll specify some API. So I'm going to show you some examples now. I'm going to try and keep it high enough from the technical gory details, and just highlight a couple of examples of how we think about communicating the reference architecture. So here's a simple application, right? There's a client, a server, and a simple database. It's almost the simplest architecture one can think of. And for this architecture, we're already going to identify some new components you need to add. So one more click, Maritza, please. Here's a list of the components, and we think about the privacy stack and the data stack, right? And in the privacy stack, and there's a bunch of names here. We're not going to go in details in any one of them, but things like how do we manage permissions, right? This is ideas of consent and rights and otherwise. How do we automating the subject rights fulfillment, right? What is the component that is responsible for that? How do we do data policy authoring? So how does an organization defines all the policies that govern the data, everything that can and can't be done, and so on. Data discovery and classification turns out to be pivotal to everything we do here. If we don't have the metadata about the data, it's very hard for us to understand policies and interpret them and apply them in a meaningful way at scale, unless we know those. And for every one of those components, we intend to do a little bit of a component design. So what does that mean? So if we look at the permission management, if I have one more click, here is the set of interactions that happens on a browser today on a simple applications, right? So we have the user, we have the browser, and we have the server. That's all what existed before privacy, okay? And the flow here, if you take the purple color out, is what happened on browsers prior to 2018 and when we started to introduce different regulations. And what we're saying here is that now in the new world, here's how your permission layer on the client side, on the interaction on the browser, need to look like, right? And here's the components that you need. Those purple boxes define what the system needs to do. Now, you might choose to hire the services of a bona fide consent management platform that exists there and integrate that into your existing technology, or you can go and build those things. But that's the components, that's the design that you need now. That permissions are important in a simple application. One more click. The other thing that goes with it is, of course, is a set of APIs. You don't need to worry about reading all of that, but they define an interface that is a protocol, if you'd like, about how we obtain consent, how we put consent from a system perspective. Okay, what are those policies? What are the required ingredients into that protocol? One more click. So then, now we're building up the stack. Advanced applications take the simple application and extend them to maybe multi-regions, multi-localities, geographically distributed. And they also include this idea of a third party. So now maybe this data is not just stored within the owned and operated systems, but it's also sent to various other downstream systems. What does that mean in terms of our stack? So just to show the evolution, one more click, you'll see that the same permissioning exists before, now includes additional components, because now we have third-party players as well in the entire ecosystem, and so we need to adjust for them as we're doing even the basic things of collecting permission, collecting consent, for example, and so on. And how do we interact with that third-party JavaScript, as we call it, the tags that those third parties have on our website, and what happens there. And then I'll just quickly highlight what the following kind of progression in the architectures are. Processors have a unique situations, right? They're downstream from that controller kind of system we just saw before. What does that mean for them? How do you extend what are kind of additional components and additional architectures around the flows around those components need to exist, and APIs, interfaces. And then finally, the last kind of top level complexity is ecosystem. When we think about supply chains, multi different systems talking to each other, how do we extend our stack in a way that respects that as a whole? All right, I'll pause here. I know we have more comments or otherwise. Any questions? This was a quick run through.
And with that quick run through, I'll also add that following this session, we have a Ketch networking session where if you want to dig into these diagrams or if you want to, share a little more about or dig into some of the components, we could definitely get into that conversation where, as I understand it with this platform, we can have cameras on and we can actually have like a big conversation.
Yeah,
I think would be great.
that's fine.
So I'm not seeing anything come up in the chat. A little bit of side channel. Okay.
So
Um,
maybe we just circle back quickly. So we said the ETP, Maritza covered everything. We have the convene, advocate.
mhm.
Um, Everything we saw here today it falls under the define aspect of what we're doing. We're excited to work with everybody. We have quite a good group of folks that are now contributing to this reference architecture. Our hope is by the end of the year to have a version out there that starts getting general feedback from everyone. And if I personally, if I have if 2 years down the road folks are still using this to kind of think about what are the architectures that need to be together, then I think we've done a job. But I believe it's going to keep evolving in parallel to how everything else is happening in the arena.
Mhm. Yes. Thanks for that wrap up, Yacov. So, like I mentioned to start, there were maybe kind of two big themes in the conversation: introducing the ethical tech project. What is the framing that we're interested in pursuing? Who are the people behind it? This is, I think, a great opportunity for a big tent effort to involve anybody who's interested in data dignity and having a different data ecosystem where permission is fundamental to it, and I think sets us up to have a better footing as we think about ethical tech and responsible tech, privacy tech. So that's one part of it, and I think a good part of that, undeniably, that tech part of it, we need to have more conversations about things like a reference architecture, and so my hope is that with these diagrams, you can take them and maybe if that part you might have checked out a little bit to think, okay, I'm not going to be working on that directly. Maybe this could become a conversation piece to your partners within your organizations, or a conversation piece to partners that you have outside your organizations. And so, if you have any recommendations on people who you think we should be talking to, people who can help us flesh out and really, start to develop and continue to develop and evaluate the reference architecture. We would love to hear that. And I'd say let's just keep this conversation going, particularly in our next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.